You're listening to the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast, a place for sex addicts to share their experiences of recovery, to help break the stigma, myths, and misconceptions of sex addiction. This podcast may contain topics of sexuality, sexual trauma, dysfunction, or other things that may be triggering, so listener discretion is advised. Hello, and welcome to the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast. My name is Jason, I'm a sex addict, and I will be your podcast host for today. Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome to episode 136 of the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast. This week, I'm honored to be sharing a recording from the Summer of Sponsorship workshop, which was held on the first weekend in July in Sacramento, California. This was right in the middle of a huge heat wave. The morning was fine, but the end of the day got up to about 114 degrees Fahrenheit or 41 degrees Celsius. Just crazy. So I got to ride up to Sacramento with my friend Paul, who has been on a number of episodes of the podcast. And he and I used to travel to Intergroup together, and it was fun to make a full day of recovery out of this. So we got up early and did the 2-hour drive up to Sacramento, and it was great. We had a chance for some breakfast there, got to meet some new people there, and reconnect with some old friends. We had multiple things going on throughout the day. The recording was from after lunch, but we did start off the day with a meeting, and we also had some activities. One of them, writing down some negative feelings, anxieties, or fears onto a rock, and then going out to the American River, which is right next to where we were, and getting a chance to name the fear or anxiety and throw it out into the river. So much fun. Besides the meeting, we had a lunch and just really got a chance to get to know each other. And then the main event was the panel recording, which was about 2 hours. It was nice. I had the personal recorder that I usually use to record workshops at the Bay Area retreat. This was nice because we did have microphones, but the ambient noise of the room was a little weird. As I was listening to the edit, the very beginning for me, when I got on the microphone, there was a weird feedback loop with my voice. And listening back to it, I totally sound like one of the visitors or lizard aliens from the old miniseries V. And V, The Final Battle. I was a huge fan of those growing up, but my voice sounded like this.
You started a chain reaction that will kill us all.
They knew we would. They're much cleverer than I thought.
So yeah, don't be surprised when you hear that. I also thought of a Parliament Funkadelic song called Aqua Boogie, that they have a similar type of effect.
I am Sir No, D-Boy of Fun. I can't swim. I never could swim. I never will swim.
And yeah, so when I was going through the edit, I thought my voice was going to sound like that the entire time, but luckily it was only for about a minute. So when you hear that, don't be off-put. But yeah, we had a wonderful panel, and I've known all of the panelists through the Bay Area retreat. Jim C., who I've known the longest, I met several years ago, and Jim was on episode 104 from the SAA and COSA speaker meeting. We also had Diana from Sacramento, and I apologize to Diana just going through the recording. I did hear that there were times where she was referred to as Diane versus Diana, but yeah, I wanted to put that up front. And also Dawn. I've met Dawn over the past couple of Bay Area retreats, so it was really nice knowing all the panelists. We also had our moderator, Ben, who I'd just met at this. And I did want to make a special shout out to everyone on the committee that put this together. It was a fantastic day, a lot of food, a lot of prep went into this, and hopefully there'll be more events like this going on in the future. Super grateful for them. So like I said, the panel workshop was about 2 hours. I managed to trim off about 25 minutes of it to bring it down to a little over an hour and a half for presentation here on the podcast. I did have to bleep out a full name that was used, so be aware of that. But yeah, since this is a long recording, I'm not going to be reading any email or playing any other music at the end of this podcast, so it'll be just a quick outro. But for the intro, I did want to read a little from the SAA pamphlet called Getting a Sponsor. And I believe I've read part of this on an episode, I'm not sure which one, but there were two sections that I wanted to read here. And some of this stuff we do cover in the workshop. And I'll leave a link to this in the show notes. The first section that I wanted to read is called What Can We Expect from a Sponsor? In SAA, there are numerous styles of sponsorship. Some sponsors require a personal meeting every week. Some only have phone time. Some have certain limits on their availability. Some have none. Some require attendance at a certain number of SAA meetings a week. Some ask to call them at a certain time every day or every week. Some do not. Some have the sponsee move rapidly through the 12 steps, others go more slowly. In preparation for working with the sponsor, many of us asked other members about how their sponsor relationships work. Some of us prepared a few questions for a potential sponsor about their style and expectations, which help us to ask what we ideally wanted. It helped both parties to determine whether we were a good match. So yeah, a lot of that is covered in some of our answers to questions. The next section I wanted to read was called, Are There Any Do's and Don'ts in Starting Sponsorship? And it says, generally speaking, our experience has shown that it is best not to expect from our sponsor any services that are given by a professional counselor or therapist. Our sponsor is not responsible for our recovery. We, the sponsees, are responsible for it. We were cautioned not to think of our sponsor as being our higher power or best friend. A sponsor is only with us to share experiences from their 12-step journey. Also, we discovered we could change sponsors. If we felt that our sponsor was behaving improperly, we asked other sober members for advice about our situation. If they agreed that something was amiss, we found a different sponsor. While we may have talked to our sponsor about anything mutually agreed upon, we were aware that our sponsor is simply a fellow sex addict who helps us solve one problem: how to become and stay sexually sober through working the 12 steps of SAA. Whatever suggestions our sponsor offered in working the 12 steps, we did our best to follow them honestly and fully. We found it counterproductive to make up some program of our own secretly and alongside what our sponsors suggested. We certainly may have asked questions about our sponsors' suggestions to more fully understand reasoning behind them. The program tools being offered to us are the same that kept our sponsor sober, and they can keep us sober too. So yeah, there's a lot more information in the pamphlet, Getting a Sponsor. But now I'm ready to turn it over to the workshop recording. Camp Pollock in Sacramento is where this was held, and there were a lot of peacocks on the ground, so there's a quick reference to peacocks right here at the beginning, and I'll talk a little bit about that in the outro. Anyway, here is the Summer of Sponsorship workshop from Sacramento. I hope you enjoy it.
Everybody enjoying the peacocks? Yeah. Peahens, turkeys, quite a lot of wildlife in these parts. Okay. Welcome to the 2024 Summer of Sponsorship Workshop, hosted by Sex Addicts Anonymous. My name is Ben. I am a sex addict. Amen. Hey, everybody. And I'm here, honored to be your facilitator for this panel, and really excited to hear what these fine folks have to say. The workshop is designed to explore the crucial role that sponsorship plays in our recovery journey. Whether you're a sponsor, a sponsee, or considering becoming one, we hope this session provides valuable insights and inspiration. Sponsorship is a cornerstone of our recovery process, offering guidance, accountability, and support. Today, we are privileged to have 4 experienced members of our community who will share their experiences and answer your questions. Before we dive in, let's begin with a brief introduction from each of our panelists. Could you each please introduce yourselves, including how long you've been in the program, and your experience as a sponsor and sponsee? And please make sure to describe your bottom line inner and middle circle behaviors, as well as your favorite outer circle activity. We'll start with Jason here, who's closest to me.
Thanks so much. Hey, everyone. I'm Jason. I'm a sex addict. I have been in the program for almost 22 years. Let's see. I'm looking at all the questions here. I have been a sponsor for roughly 17 years. I've had a couple of different sponsors, and I can't count how many sponsees. Some of them have gone through all of the steps. I'm a temporary sponsor, getting people through their circles and first step. And I've had a number of sponsees who have just kind of dropped out. But yeah, so my inner circle, why I came into the program is collecting and masturbating to pornography, especially child pornography is what got me into the program. I'm also an intimacy avoidant, and I can talk about that later. Middle circle, negative self-talk and staying up after 12:30 are kind of some of the core middle circle ones that I look out for. My favorite outer circle, it's like picking my favorite kid. I'm going to say listening to music. I had podcasting up there as well, but yeah, listening to music.
Thank you, Jason. Welcome. Our next panelist is Diana. Diana, welcome.
Hey, everybody. I'm Diana.
Hi, Diana.
Hey. So, I forgot what the questions were, but I'm just going to start with my, there it is. Okay. I've been in the program since 2009, and my sobriety date is 12/27 of 2012. My inner circle of behaviors are sex outside of my marriage, masturbation, contacting acting out partners, and pornography. Some of my middle circles are avoiding doing a 10th step, being in my pain body, going to tanning facilities, avoiding my sponsor, being angry, traveling with friends, with enemies, with friends with enemies, they are, and lying to my wife, lying to my sponsor. My favorite outer circle behaviors, my favorite outer circle stuff is doing body work, so massage work, sensory motor work, doing stuff with my ventral vagal nerve to calm my body down. I think that for me, I get the most out of that physically, emotionally, and spiritually. Working with other people, going to meetings, and visiting my sponsor once a year in Virginia. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Next we go to Jim.
Hi, my name is Jim, and I'm a sex addict.
Hey, Jim.
So I've been in the program 32 years, and I was scared into sobriety, so I have 32 years of sobriety. Okay, so my experience with sponsees, first of all, what I can tell you is that growing up, I never had a father who explained life to me. And so consequently, what happened to me was I tried to figure it out on my own. And at one point, I was molested as a child, and that colored my outlook on life from that point on, and it sexualized me in a lot of ways. So one of the things I know is that the program offers us some simple solutions that nobody explained to us. And when I began to realize that, I wanted to pass that on to other people, because that had never been passed on to me, the simple thing about telling the truth. Nobody explained that was so important in your life. My bottom line behavior here is I was arrested for molesting a child who came to my home. And consequently, I went off to jail and eventually to prison for that. And I'm going to tell you, it was the best years of my life, because I grew up in a great way during there. Governor Jerry Brown, who was the governor at the time, who I despised, but he gave me a sabbatical for free. I didn't have to worry about eating or dressing or any of that stuff, and I could just concentrate on myself. So I took that time seriously to work my program while I was away, and I came out the better for it. So my inner circle is not conversing with children without an adult present, not having any kind of interaction with a child with the sense of grooming them to be sexually abused in some sort of way. I also have frottage, which is touching people without their consent. I have, let's see, what else? I mean, there's a ton of stuff I have there, and I can't think right now. So let me talk just quickly about my middle circle, and I have a lot of stuff in my middle circle, but I have it structured a lot differently than what the program has structured, and let me just quickly explain that. So in my inner circle, I have masturbation with any kind of visual materials or written materials. In my middle circle, I constructed my middle circle in 3 separate areas: an entry level, a moderate level, and a boundary level. So the entry level would be if I found myself masturbating once a week, I've stepped into my middle circle in some way. And, I need to address what's going on for me. If I masturbate twice in the same week, it says to me I'm not taking care of the issues that are coming up for me because I'm using my masturbation as a way to medicate myself. And then if I'm in boundary behavior, I say if I masturbate twice in the same day, I need to call my sponsor. I need to get in touch with my therapist because there's certainly stuff I'm not dealing with. So that's the way my middle circle is constructed. My outer circle, boy, I've gone through a whole bunch of iterations around the outer circle behavior. But I can tell you, I boiled it down to, do I love myself? Unconditionally love myself. Because when I love myself, I don't think about acting out any time of day. And when I think about acting out, the first question is, why am I not loving myself? So that's my outer circle. So that's it. My name's Jim.
Thanks, Jim. And last but not least, we have Don.
Hello, I'm Don. I don't do well at speaking in public, so one of the things I can throw away is that. I'm grateful to be here, grateful for what's already been said, makes my job easier. For myself, the circles have evolved. I came into recovery in 2014 through therapy, and at the suggestion of the CSAT, waited till I had completed a lot of therapy work before getting a sponsor, working the steps, and that happened in 2016 and started sponsoring myself in 2017 and then moved to this area from Santa Rosa a little bit over a year ago. So my circles have evolved over time, and they're inner, middle, and outer circles, which I view as unhealthy, questionable, and healthy, very simply. So in my circles, the most important thing is, as my sponsor defines it, a spiritual connection. And so you'll hear elements of the same thing in all 3 circles. So the first and most important thing that would define the relapse for me would be abandoning conscious spiritual expression, practice, or truth in all areas of creation is the way I look at it. If you want to use the word life, that could be a substitute. Illegal or secretive public exhibitionism or voyeurism, illegal or secretive sex or sex devoid of intimacy, passion, and or romance, illegal or secretive acquisition and use of any and all forms and types of spiritually contradictory or perversely sexually stimulating clothing, objects, or pornography. And of course, that then begs the question, what is pornography? Middle circle would be, so abandonment is like giving up on recovery. Disconnecting is, through the course of the day, I'll be disconnected. I don't know of anybody who is constantly conscious of their connection throughout the day. If there is a person, I haven't met them yet, it's certainly not me. So my middle circle is disconnecting from conscious spiritual expression, practice, or truth in all areas of life. Any form of deceit, delusion, denial, or dishonesty, unhealthy anger, entitlement, grandiosity, judgment, or self-reprobation, illegally or secretively searching, shopping for, or viewing any and all forms and types of spiritually contradictory or perversely sexually stimulating clothing objects or pornography, illegal or secretive non-public exhibitionism or voyeurism. So for me, that was about, like, can the drapes be closed a certain amount and maybe somebody can still see me? That's what I mean by non-public. Public is pretty easy to define. So my outer circle, if we're going to touch on only one thing, my outer circle is larger than either my inner circle or my middle circle. And that's what I would advise the sponsee to have, is the inner circle behaviors at the core. And typically that's a few. The outer circle is limitless. So the first and most important thing for me in recovery in general is connecting in conscious spiritual expression, practice, and truth in all areas of life. So, again, grateful to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, Don. A lot of great experience. Almost 100 years of recovery time spent here at this table. What's amazing to me is the amount of different ways that we can articulate things. As an addict, I'm lying every time my lips move, right, they say, and finding ways to ratchet down our recovery. Diana, would you mind showing the circle diagram that you had just a second ago, just really briefly for the group, to see how detailed all of these folks have articulated their circles to that degree. That's recovery right there, is putting the work in to have these types of answers. So thank you all for being here today. Very grateful. And we will take questions towards the end, if that's okay, or unless it's something... Sure, quick question. Sobriety in terms of like bottom line behaviors or years of sobriety? Oh, inner circle behaviors, just one time, like real quick, maybe? Yeah,
sure.
Who in mind?
My inner circle in full, some of the other things I did not include were voyeurism, collecting pornography, etc. And I am just over 9 years sober from those.
Thank you.
One more thing with intimacy avoidance. If anyone has heard of intimacy avoidance, sexual anorexia, it is kind of the flip side of acting out, is acting in. I've recently redefined my circles to include some of my acting in behaviors. And the primary one that's in my inner circle is not being intimately connected with my wife physically or emotionally for longer than a month. There's been times where we're off doing our separate things, and it really drives my intimacy avoidance. So in order to stay sexually sober in intimacy avoidance, I need to make sure that I'm maintaining a connection, constant connection with my wife.
Thank you.
Again, my acting out, my inner circle is masturbation, contacting ex-acting out partners, sex outside of my marriage, lying to my wife, and there was one more and I forgot about it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jim?
So let me say that, first of all, setting up our circles is arbitrary. And really what we're trying to do here is that addicts have a hard time setting boundaries around anything. So it is one of the very first things we do in the program is to set boundaries around our behavior. Now, what my inner circle is not going to be the same as your inner circle. And it is what is demoralizing and potentially damaging to you. And it's outlined in the Green Book. It's a good place to go to look at what are the criteria to use to set up your inner circle. I say things to my sponsees like, is this criminal activity that you're engaged in that you may be arrested for? So if you're going out in parks and having sex with men in parks, you need to put that in your inner circle because you could be arrested for it. Are you harming somebody else in terms of emotionally or physically harming them in any kind of way? Those kinds of things need to be pressed. Is the activity you're engaged in harmful to you? In terms of, are you damaging your own body? Or emotionally, is it damaging to you? Should be in your circle. So this could be different for each individual person that's in the room. And I encourage my sponsees not to compare their inner circle with anybody else's inner circle. So somebody else might not put pornography in their inner circle, or you need to put your pornography in yours. Like I said, this is what we individually set up with our sponsors. I had a sponsee at one time who came to me and said, oh yes, here's my inner circle. And I looked at it and I saw prostitution in his middle circle. And I said, gee, don't you think you ought to move that into your inner circle? He said, oh no, I'm fine with that. And I kind of looked at the ceiling and said, well, the only thing I can say to you is to see how it works out for you. Okay, I'm Jim. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. And Don, if you would remind us of your inner circle behaviors and length of sobriety.
My sobriety date is July the 30th of 2015. My inner circle is, again, abandoning conscious spiritual expression, practice, or truth in all areas of life, in any area of life. Illegal or secretive public exhibitionism or voyeurism, illegal or secretive sex, or sex devoid of intimacy, passion, and or romance, illegal or secretive acquisition or use of any and all forms and types of spiritually contradictory or perversely sexually stimulating clothing, objects, or pornography. So, for me, it was the secrets and lies. The secrets and lies powered the addiction. Without the secrets and lies, and I believe that's why all the books speak of rigorous honesty, without that, the addiction has no power, it has no place. And as I have continued on the path of recovery, increasingly it has recovery, which is different than sobriety. Sobriety and abstinence are like the gateposts to me of recovery. Without abstinence and sobriety, it's really impossible to really work these steps and to work them effectively. And I think that's, as already has been alluded to, that's why we established boundaries initially. And then it's a matter of practicing those boundaries and beginning to work the steps, simultaneously. I hope that answers the question. Thanks.
It does. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Jim, follow?
Listen, what's interesting to me is when I get a new sponsee, generally what happens is they put everything in their inner circle. Oh my God, I don't want to think about touching myself ever again. If I do that, I've lost my sobriety. Well, that's not reasonable because we don't have control over our thoughts a lot of times. And so as a sponsor with a person like that, you really have to pare it down to the essentials. The other thing for me as a sponsor is I want success. Because if the sponsee doesn't find some success, they have a tendency to give up on themselves. So I can give you an example. I had a sponsee one time who was going to parks at midnight and having sex with other men in the park, and he was going to bathhouses. And he could not find any sobriety. And I said to him, let's separate out the two. Let's put going to parks in your inner circle, because that's going to get you arrested or beat up some night or killed. Where at least if you're going to bathhouses, it's safe there. It's not really what we want. Doesn't meet your goals. But at least if we can separate those two for a while, you can begin to find some sobriety, and at some point maybe we'll move bathhouses into your inner circle. So I think it's important for the sponsor to be able to gauge what's appropriate to be put in the inner circle and what's be put in the middle circle.
Thanks, Jim. No, I like the idea of the circles being kind of a living document with the sponsee and the sponsor, and over time they adjust. I think that's really great advice. So, question for everybody. What inspired you to become a sponsor? It's a tough question. Jason?
Yeah, so the way the question is written here also has to seek a sponsor. And I wanted to answer seeking a sponsor first. When I first got into the program, I looked at the steps on the wall and did a mental checklist, and yep, I've done that, yep, I've done that, yep, I've done that. I'm not going to do that, yep, I've done that. And I thought that I had done the steps, which didn't lead to any sort of sobriety because I was still acting out all the time and getting caught over and over again. I realized that I actually needed to work the program. And in order to successfully do that and not bullshit myself, I needed someone else to hold me accountable and to ask hard questions. So I sought out a sponsor. As I got further and further into my step work, I wanted to be able to carry what I had learned to other sponsees. And my second sponsee would not let me sponsor anyone until I had done a 9th step amends. And so it was a good thing to keep me motivated to keep working my steps, as I was starting to have people ask me to be their sponsor, and I politely had to say, not yet, but ask me in a few months. It kept me motivated, but once I was able to do that, I'll get into the imposter syndrome of taking on my first couple of sponsees a little bit later. But what inspired me to become a sponsor is I was learning a lot in this program, and holding it on to myself doesn't do much.
Thank you. Diana?
At first, I wasn't really looking for a sponsor. I had attended a women's conference, a beverage program, AA women's conference, and I talked about my career. And there was a woman in the audience who was moved by what I had said during my share. She got in contact with me a few weeks later, and it was a woman who I had worked with, and I had a lot of resentment towards her. I thought poorly of her, but we started talking about sobriety and about recovery. And the next thing I know, our talk about recovery in the beverage program turned into recovery from sex addiction. And she had been involved in her own recovery of sex addiction for several years. And that blew me away. It blew me away. And it also called me out, right? It was the first time I'd ever been called out for my behavior. And so she started to sponsor me, and she has been sponsoring me for the last 15 years. She used to live here. We used to have a meeting called the patio meeting on a Wednesday night. We were the group of women that started Sacramento SAA in 2010. So what made me want to be a sponsor was after I had gone through working my most of my steps, I felt great relief. As a result of that great relief, I wanted other people to feel the same kind of relief that I had, because I was a really miserable sex addict. I was really a miserable human being. And I started to feel that change, and it was really important for me to offer that kind of recovery to another person.
Thank you, and thank you for your founding of why we're here today. Appreciate that. Jim?
When I came in the program, I looked at the steps, and it reminded me a lot of stuff of what we do at work. We make these goals and stuff and put them on a little chart, and then we fold them up and put them behind a desk somewhere and never look at them again. And so when I saw the steps, I kind of rolled my eyes and went, oh, yeah, right, sure. I didn't really understand that it was the foundation of the program. And so when I started to work the steps, I really wanted to work step 1 really hard because I wanted to be part of the group. I wanted to be accepted. Steps 2 and 3 were a little bit more difficult for me because I didn't really have an understanding of higher power at the time. And I jumped right to step 9 because I really wanted to run out and say, I'm so sorry, won't you please forgive me? Which step 9 is not about. Because I wanted people to like me, who I adore. My sponsor said, Jim, you're working a really, really good program. He said, when you're through working the program of Jim, why don't you come and work the 12-step programs with me? So I have to tell you, it took me some time to realize I hit the 4th step, and I got scared because I knew from the 4th step I would accumulate a whole bunch of names that in the end, in the 9th step, I would have to confront. And it scared me to the point where I could not start the 4th step. And it took me a while to realize that I had to move forward. And when I started to work the 4th step, I really began to understand the joy of it, the worth of it. And it's something I rely on today when I'm having some issues to either do a 10th step or go back and do a 4th step all over again. I look forward to that because it shows me my defects of character, what I need to work on. In terms of sponsorship, I think I said this to somebody else, I maybe said it earlier in the meeting, I was never taught how to deal with life. And my understanding of the 12 steps is it really gives us a foundation of how to work a life that I had never been taught before. And when I began to understand how simplistic the program was, it's not an easy program, I don't want to say that, but how simplistic the program was and how simplistic the tools are to work the program, I just said, this is what I want to pass on to somebody else. It was given to me by other people in the program, and it's my obligation to pass it on forward. So that's pretty much why I started the house.
Thanks, Jim. And finally, Don.
Well, again, I agree with a lot of what's already been said. What inspired me to become a sponsor is the same thing that inspired me to get into recovery, and that is fear. So what brought me into recovery was my spouse at the time discovering a browser that I had not wiped clean. And then, over the course of a week, deciding that what she needed to do for her own safety after multiple previous discoveries, she needed to pack up and leave. And the confrontation that was associated with that drove me to finally accept that I had an issue that was greater than me and seek some help, and that came in the form of a CSAT. And at a point in recovery, the CSAT wanted all of his clients to start working the steps, so that drove me to find a sponsor. I had been going to meetings for about 2 years at that time, so there was a very short list of people that I really identified with and, felt that they would keep me honest and would definitely have the capacity to take me through the steps. And the same thing with sponsorship. There's an expectation in the line of sponsorship that I'm in that a sponsee will A, complete the steps, and B, that they'll sponsor. And so I'm on step 12, and this wasn't the first conversation. Again, it was simply the last. And I'd met with my sponsor, and he said to me, are you sponsoring yet? And of course, this was a question he already knew the answer to. And I said, no, don't have any sponsees yet. And he looked at me and he said, I need a plan from you on how you're going to find a sponsee. And I said, okay. And I said, when do you need it? Do I have a month, a year? He said, today, now. I said to him, I'll do what I did in the beginning. I'll go to a meeting a day until I find a sponsee. That's how I started a sponsor. I said, so how do I do this? And he told me. He said, you go to a meeting, you look for a newcomer, somebody you don't know, you sit next to them. And I did. I sat next to somebody I didn't know. It was new to that meeting. It wasn't a meeting I attended frequently, but it was a meeting. And I shared something. I don't know what I shared. Don't remember. But at the end of the meeting, I introduced myself, and this person looked at me and introduced themselves, and he said, by the way, are you available to sponsor? And I said, I just happen to be. That was my first sponsee, so who was still with me. So that's how it happened. Thanks.
Thanks, Don. That's really great. Right back to Don, actually. In some other countries, doing research for this event, I learned that in some other countries, instead of sponsor, they use the term mentor, which I think is really interesting. And so my question, starting with Don, is, in your opinion, what does a sponsor do for a sponsee, and what do they not do for a sponsee?
Thank you. I have the rare good fortune of being on the outreach committee for the ISO, the LGBTQ outreach committee. And that's an opportunity to speak with people from all over the world who are looking for specific sponsorship. And that's been a real gift. So, can you give it to me again, please?
Sure, yeah, of course. In your opinion, what does a sponsor do for a sponsee, and what do they not do?
Thank you. So, one of the best analogies that I've heard about what a sponsor actually does, I actually picked up off of, years ago in meetings there used to be CDs, a CD library that, you gave the CD guy $10, and if you brought the CD back, they gave you your money back. But you could listen to it. So I started listening to CDs on sponsorship. And one of the best analogies I've ever heard, and what I still feel is really what the steps do. And so, in taking a person through the steps, what a sponsor maybe does. A sponsor guides someone through the steps to the point, wherever that is, that they begin to have a relationship with an entity that is greater than them. And then the sponsor gets out of the way. So I think that really describes it in the best way that I've seen. It's that once the spiritual awakening, which most people, if you listen to the steps being read in a meeting, most people do not read the 12th step the way that it's written. Most people read the 12th step as a result is the spiritual awakening. That's not what it says. The step is the result, is the spiritual awakening. And that is exactly what my experience has been. And that is, I think, the power of the 12 steps, is that it does lead to that. And then recovery continues from there with a person, at least in my case, finding a continuous relationship with a power that's greater than them. Thanks.
Thank you. Jason?
Yeah, I love this question. I find it really simple. The sponsor guides the sponsee through the 12 steps. And just recently, what I'm starting to do is teach the traditions as a sponsor to a sponsee. And yeah, I wrote in the second half of the question for the panel. What a sponsor does not do for a sponsee is we're not therapists. We're not there to offer advice or how to run a business or, should I do this? Should I do that? Anytime I find questions like that coming up, I try to see where those types of questions can be answered in step work. If it can't be answered in step work, I said, hey, this is out of my realm. Go talk to your clergy member, go talk to your therapist. I'm not here for that. So it's basically just to get someone through the steps so they can start sponsoring other people. And teach the traditions so that they can carry the traditions on to other people in the program. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, our next question goes to, I'm going to start picking people for some of these questions, and if you have other things to add, feel free to weigh in. But the next one goes to Diana, and then Jim. How has the relationship with your sponsor or sponsee impacted your personal recovery journey?
Wow. The relationship with my sponsor has really been, it's been incredible. We've learned so much together as a sponsor and sponsee. When we first started, we had about 8 other women, and there were no men in the program at that time. And we met on my sponsor's back patio. And the meeting was called the Wednesday patio meeting. And that's how that Zoom meeting became the patio meeting. But we did our circles together in a group around her kitchen table. And we shared our steps together as we went through the steps. And she is the kind of sponsor that could take 8 women and take them through the steps at the same time. You know, and that just amazed me at the knowledge that she had for really only being in the program for a very short amount of time. You know, she only had about 2 or 3 years in the program. But, you know, she used a lot of the knowledge that she had from the beverage program that she brought into the SAA program as well. And so that relationship has continued to build. She did move to Virginia. We have a Zoom meeting once a week, and so I get a chance to speak with her once a week. And then all of the women that are part of our group now, we have a few women from New York, some from Nashville, Tennessee, one in Hawaii, 4 of us here in Sacramento, and then my sponsor has three new women in Richmond, Virginia. And so we all get on a Zoom together on Wednesdays. And, you know, with that, we listen to someone's first step. We talk about the steps. We talk about what's going on in our lives, but we stay committed to each other. And then I go out every September and I spend a week with my sponsor. And then we go through any of the steps that I need to work on. And so, you know, that's the kind of sponsor that I want to be, is I want to be a sponsor that is available to my sponsees for anything that they need. Working the circles together is always, you know, that's the first thing I do with them is work the circles together, and then let's start reading the book, and then let's start on your first step. So that's, you know, that's what she's done for me, and my recovery journey has really just been incredible. I'm still married to the same woman that I was married to when I got here, when I was in trouble, and I stay in program. I go to 3 meetings a week. And I check in with my sponsees and I check in with my sponsor on a weekly basis. Thank you.
Thank you. And Jim?
So let me talk about my relationship with my sponsor first. First of all, he's moved out of the Bay Area and he's living in Seattle. And so occasionally we Zoom with one another, but we don't meet on a regular basis. He's available to me whenever I need. You know, what I find for myself is I have stinking thinking, and I can rationalize what I'm doing fairly easily. And what I have to do is, if I'm going to make any kind of major decision, I have to call my sponsor and run it by him, and he will quickly say, "Boy, that's a bunch of crap," you know, and right-size me. And I think that that's important to have people in my life that tell me the truth, which my sponsor does without hesitation. And I trust what he's telling me. You know, I may not like it, but I trust it. And I rely on him a lot. I love my sponsor, you know. He is a major part of my life. Let me talk about sponsees. So right now I'm carrying 7 sponsees, and my sponsor has told me I can only carry 5. But I can't say no, so now I have 7. At one point I was carrying 11 sponsees, which didn't work because I wasn't giving them enough attention. Each individual wanted enough attention. So my sponsees vary in terms of their needs. I have a couple of sponsees who I've been working with for 13 to 14 years, and They don't require the attention that I would normally give somebody that's new to the program. So if you're new to the program with me, you meet with me every week for an hour and a half, and you call me every day. And that's an imperative for me. That if you want to work with me, that's what you do. And I give you homework, and I expect you to come with the homework done. And it works for me. I think we were talking earlier with somebody that it really depends upon your sponsee and how much effort that they want to put into their sobriety. And, sometimes people come and say, well, I really haven't done my homework. And I have to say, why? I was telling somebody, my first sponsor said to me at the coffee talk, he said, I want you to call me at 8 o'clock in the morning. And before you call me, I want you to make your bed. And I went, huh? What's that about? Anyway, so the next morning, I'm watching the clock. I'm punching the thing because I want to be perfect with my new sponsor. And he answers and he says, "Good morning, Jim. Have you made your bed?" I said, "No." And he said, "Well, why are you calling me? Hang up and go make your bed." I went, "What?" So I called him back and I said, "What does making my bed have to do with sex and sobriety?" And he said, "If you can't do the simple things I ask you to do, how are you going to do the hard things?" Boy, that hit me right between the eyes. So I don't use that with my sponsees, only on occasion, rare occasion. But, I do expect them to do the work because I'm not there to do their work for them. I'm just there to guide them through the process and to help them understand what's appropriate and what's not. And, just as I said earlier, if somebody comes to me with everything they have in their inner circle, my job is to help them pare it down to something that's reasonable and workable. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, so this question is for any of the panelists who want it. Can you please share an experience or a moment that highlighted the importance of sponsorship for you? What's a memorable moment or something that had a high impact on you regarding sponsorship? Jason and then Diana?
Yeah, it was an expansion of the first question. I drew an arrow down. When finding my first sponsor, I started talking, I came into the program, and for a year and a half, I talked about having a problem with pornography. And then as we were going through questions on the first step, I was pretty vague, and he sat me down and said, "Bullshit, write down every fucking thing that you're looking at." And I wrote down category by category and started listing out things that I had never said out loud in a meeting. And he also pointed out that doing this work was for me and me only. I was holding back on a lot of stuff because I thought my wife was going to read it. And so that really opened me up to talking about the problems that I had with voyeurism, window peeping, things like that I had never discussed at a meeting level. And so he really opened me up to being specific about my behaviors. That really highlighted the importance of having someone there to counteract my own bullshit in my head and enable me to get specific. I've since then turned that to my sponsees. I've noticed where some of their first steps are lagging, and it's like, hey, this one little sentence looks like 5 or 6 paragraphs. Why are you not telling me exactly what's going on? And I got them to write it out, and it made a much better first step. And yeah, so having that is a real highlight for me.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Diana?
Yes, for the first few years of my recovery, and even before, I had a lot of black and white thinking. I couldn't see the rainbow whatsoever. So that's one of the benefits that I've learned from my sponsor is, that I can look at the world in color. Just recently, I had a sponsee give me a call, and he said, I don't know if I've crossed into my inner circle. And then he explained what had happened. He said, "Can you help me with it?" And I said, "Well, I can listen to you, but you're the one that has to decide whether or not you have stepped, into your inner circle. I'm not a judge or a jury or anything else." And I told him, I said, "You're the one that has to make that decision, and I'm okay with whatever decision you make. But one of the most important things that I want you to know is that it takes nothing, if you reset your sobriety date, it takes nothing from the work that you've done." Right? It was really important for me to share that with him because I've always been a shame-based person. And so if I didn't do something right, then I would just beat myself up. I would just take the whip and just, self-flagellation. I just was such a bad person. And I learned that I wasn't. I learned that I'm a pretty decent human being. And so I want my sponsees to know that what it does is it enhances their program. I think that a nice little slip will wake you right back up again. Thank you.
Thank you. So our next question, we'll start with Jim. What are some common challenges that you have faced as a sponsor or sponsee, and how did you overcome them?
That's an interesting question. One of the things I realized, because I know for myself, when I started working with steps, I had a really tough time starting the fourth step. And it was really challenging to me. I would sit at the table with a piece of paper in front of me, and I would get up an hour later and not have written anything. And it was about fear. And my sponsor was very gentle with me and said, when you become willing, you will start working the step. And I can remember at one point, I wrote my wife and said, my ex-wife actually, and said, "I would really love to do a 9 step with you," understanding that I hadn't done the 4th, 5th, 6th, or 7th step. And she wrote back, and I can quote you what she said. She said, "Thank you, but no thank you." That was the whole letter. And at that point, I realized that I wasn't sexually acting out, but I was still acting out. It was my need to control and manipulate people. And, as they say in AA, I was a dry drunk, And it said, okay, you can either go on and pretend you're in sobriety, or you can really work the steps. And that was sort of the impetus on me beginning to work the 4th step. But what I can say is I have a lot of compassion for sponsees who run into roadblocks, whether it's the 4th step or the 8th and 9th step. I was just talking to somebody, I think it was today, around the 9th step and how they were really struggling with, oh my God, I'm scared about doing the 9th step. And I had to remind them that, if you look at the 8th step talks about you have to become willing. If you can't become willing, there's no way you're going to be able to do the 9th step. And so you don't have to be scared about doing the preparation work for it, because it is about becoming willing. And, I know for myself, because I'm confronting parents of children I have molested, that I was scared to death, but I was willing to do the 9th step with them. So finally the understanding is that the 9th step is really about trying to make things right, not trying to find forgiveness. So I think that's, I run into roadblocks all the time with sponsees. And sometimes I think you have to be quick on your feet as a sponsor, because I don't have all the questions. And here's what's interesting. Sometimes something will come out of my mouth, and I will think in my head, where the hell did that come from? And then the next thought is, God, I need to incorporate that into my own program. And it's as if it's been channeled in some way. My higher power channeled something for me. So that's what I can say. Thank you.
Well said. Thanks, Jim. Don?
common challenges I've faced as a sponsor or sponsee and how have I overcome them? Well, frankly, I haven't. It was when I let go of, that I needed to have the capacity to overcome, that I became open to a solution greater than myself. So I used to go to meetings kind of at the midpoint or maybe after of working the steps, and the phrase that I was using at that time was that the steps work more on me than I work on them. And as has already been alluded to, the solution is, frankly, if I could recover alone, I wouldn't be sitting here. So the solution is beyond me. The solution is collective, in my experience. It's intuitive. And one of the beauties of the line of sponsorship that I'm in is that I'm not alone. I tell potential sponsees very early and up front that I sponsor through my sponsor. And so if I come to a point where I feel like I'm being of no service, I speak with my sponsor about it. And if I think once it's been referred to other people in the line sometimes, So, this recovery from this addiction is collective. It's reflected individually, but it's not, it's not me. It's all of those who've come before me, and that's why I pay a lot of homage to the big book, because that was the start of 12-step recovery. It's those early years, and that is the gift of the AA to all 12-step organizations, not simply this one. Thanks.
Thank you.
Listen, early last year, I was fired by a sponsee. The very first time in 30 years I'd ever been fired by a sponsee. So I'd been working with him for, about 2.5 to 3 months, and he just came to me out of the blue and said, "You're fired." And I said to him, "Oh, well, thank you. Is there something that you and I can work out?" He said, "No." And I said, "Well, can you tell me, what it is that I'm doing that hasn't been working with you?" And he said, "Yes, you're trying to change me." I went, "I think it's time for you to move on." And in fact, he dropped out of the program. So all I can say is, we can't fix everybody. We just can't do it.
Yeah, that's a great expectation. Thank you. That timing and life, so many things, life on life's terms. Not everyone is their moment now. Okay, so the next question, and I'm going to modify it just a little bit. What is the top quality or qualities that make an effective sponsor? What are the top qualities that make an effective sponsor? We can start with Jason.
Yeah, this is one that I actually wrote down notes for earlier. Being flexible and adaptable. My first sponsor had me call at a specific time during the week, and it didn't work for me. And so the ability to be flexible, I've learned things from my sponsees in working steps. Some of the things that hey, I found this on this step. What if we tried this? And we looked at it. There was one in step 3 and one in step 4. And it was something that I got to learn by being flexible. And it's like, hey, this isn't the way my sponsor taught me, but I was able to learn something and being able to pass that on to some of my other sponsees. And the thing that I wrote down that was an expansion on something that Jim had mentioned about the circles is the freedom to experiment. We don't always have the correct answer, and the ability to try something. If it works, great. If it doesn't work, adapt. One of my sponsees was having a regular slip with pornography every 3 weeks, and we decided to modify his circles to allow masturbation to pornography once every 3 weeks. And it worked for a long time, and until he started doing it twice. And then it's like, okay, let's go back to what we originally had it. But having that ability to be flexible, see what works and see what doesn't, and it keeps it as a learning experience for me as a sponsor as well as my sponsees.
Great, thank you. Very dynamic. Anyone else? We'll do Diana and then Don. Is that okay? Okay.
What qualities make an effective sponsor?
Correct.
Well, I think that a sponsor should have knowledge of the steps and of the traditions, and has a plan for how to work steps with a sponsee. I think it's important to know how to work the circles and how to explain the circles, and to really just sit down with a sponsee and work them together. Right? That's what my sponsor did with me. She sat us down and we worked this stuff together. I think it's important to not be an authority figure, and I had a really hard time with that when I first started, because I had been a police officer for 30 years. So we were going to do it my way. And then I got fired. And then I realized my sponsor was a law enforcement officer also, and she, I just learned from her, really. I think that for me, it's important to be loving and kind, to pay attention, right, to what they're saying, to not space off when a sponsee is talking to me, to pay attention to their story, and to show compassion.
Great stuff.
So I wrote down a series. For me, I'm going to list a series of things I want to see in a sponsor, and I hope I can be that for myself. I want to be patient, and I want to be gentle, and I want to be caring and non-judgmental with the individual that I'm working with. I want to be supportive, and I want to be present, and I want to listen with intention, not just listen, but with intention. I want to be available. I tell my sponsees, I don't care if it's 2 a.m, if you need me, call me. And I want to be consistent. The last thing I've said here before is I want them to understand no matter what's going on, I will never abandon them. So those are the qualities.
Thank you. Don?
The qualities that make an effective sponsor. When I was seeking a sponsor, I was in therapy, and so I asked the CSAT, what guidelines do you feel I should look for in a sponsor? And I still remember what he said. So what he said at the time was he felt look for a sponsor who is on or past beyond the 9th step, someone who has at least a year of sobriety, and someone who is actively being sponsored, who has a sponsor, and who is actively attending meetings and things like that. So I really feel that was good guidance. And then also someone whose recovery, a potential sponsee can identify with. It makes it much easier, I think, if people have some knowledge that their sponsor has similar acting out behaviors or acting in behaviors, as the case may be, because there's a level of confidence, I think, in that there isn't otherwise, perhaps. So, anyway, thanks.
Thanks, Don. Okay, and this is our last question for everybody before we open up to the group. So if you have questions, please start getting those ready in your mind, and we'll go ahead and get you a microphone. This is a question for each of the panelists. For those who are considering sponsorship, or maybe they're new, what advice would you give or would you offer to someone who's considering sponsorship? Jason?
Yeah, I learned this at a workshop at our Bay Area retreat, is opening up a dialogue with a potential sponsee, kind of an interview process with the sponsor. This was referenced. There was a question earlier in the day about this, and a response that was really similar. But yeah, having the sponsor talk about what they offer as a sponsor and what the sponsee is looking for to see if there's a match. And the one thing I really took out of that is if this relationship isn't working for either party, to be able to say, hey, no offense, this isn't working for me, no hard feelings, I would like to move on to someone else. And I've had sponsees do that with me after I had had a slip. A couple stayed with me, a couple wanted to move on. I've had a couple of sponsees who weren't doing their work and said, it's nothing against you, but you aren't doing the work that I'm asking you to. And there's no hard feelings. And so just to open up with the dialogue before getting into a relationship, sponsor-sponsee relationship, what's expected, what are the things that are being offered.
Great, thank you. Diana?
Those who are new or considering sponsorship, are they considering being a sponsor or being a sponsee?
Being a sponsor.
Being a sponsor?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So I have this little list that I created. I think that most importantly is that you share your story and encourage the sponsee to do the same. That you share the story or listen to their story without judgment. It's important to schedule face-to-face meetings with your sponsee, to stay in telephone communication with your sponsee. One of the things that I always do is make sure that they have a meeting schedule and they know which meetings to attend. I let them know so we have a phone list, and so I pass on my phone list, the women's phone list or the men's phone list, whichever one we're using. We agree on specific times to call each other. We talk about the importance of honesty, confidentiality, and anonymity within the program and the sponsor-sponsor relationship. I ask a newcomer to help them define what acting out is, right, and how to work with their 3 circles. We make agreements on the types of readings they're going to do, and when they're going to schedule a time to meet with me, so we can go over whatever step work they have. When we do work, I need for them to block off like a 4-hour period. I can't do a full 5th step in one day. It kicks my rear end. And so we schedule the time to get the 5th step done, as quickly as possible, but we're not doing 9 hours in a day. I can't do it. We provide direction on how to work the steps, finding ways of being service to the fellowship is really important. I always try to get a sponsee to be active in the meeting itself, to be of service to other people. One of the really important things is when I talk with someone is that I use the word I and not you. I don't give someone direction and say, you need to do this, you need to do this. What I say is, this is what I'd like to suggest. These are the suggestions. This is what I've done, and this is what's worked. And so, one of the really important things for me is to use myself in first person when I'm talking to a sponsee and explaining things to them.
Great stuff. That's a good list. Jim?
So I agree with both Jason and Diane. One of the things I want to make clear with the sponsee is that, you're getting help from us and you're getting, in a large way, professional help from us. Even though we don't have a degree behind our thing. And that you need to take us seriously about what we're doing. We're not charging you $150 an hour or $200 an hour. But if you don't treat us with respect, like you don't show up when we ask you to show up, that's disrespectful to me. Because I prepare before I see you. I do the work that's required. I'm ready when I show up to work with you, but if you don't show up or don't do your work, that's disrespectful to me. So don't waste my time. And I'm pretty clear about that, And I think it's really important that I set that kind of boundary with my sponsee right off, that this is serious work. This is just not something we do as a lark, So, like I said before, I require my sponsees to meet with me once a week for an hour to an hour and a half. And I think it's important for me as a sponsor in the very beginning to begin building trust. Because if my sponsor doesn't trust me, there isn't any point in me moving on with them, because they're not going to share what's going on with them. As I said before, I had a sponsee who wasn't calling me, and he said, well, I'm afraid if I tell you I'm slipping, that you'll fire me. Well, listen, this is, like I said before, this is where I make my money. You know, if you do 100% well, I'm just coasting along as a sponsor. I don't need to do much. It's when you run into roadblocks, that's when I make my money. So anyway, I guess that's enough. Thanks.
Thanks, Jim. And last but not least, Don.
Yeah, there was some conversation earlier today about quote-unquote negative emotions, and it reminded me of an analogy, and that is that, everyone wants to live at the top of the mountain. However, it is the climb up the mountain that makes it strong. So, in working with sponsees, I encourage them to welcome the tribulations and the struggle and even the slips. It is in those slips that there is the opportunity for what my CSAT used to call the autopsy. And that autopsy, in the steps, we work from symptom back to solution, back to cause, And when we get to cause, that's where solution can happen. Until we get to cause, all we're doing is just repetitive symptoms. So the opportunity is in the struggle. It's, as someone's already said, it's easy when it's easy, and I'm grateful for when it's easy. But when it's difficult, that's when I'm learning, that's when I'm growing. It's not the other. If I can indulge a moment, on the preliminary list of questions we were given, there's, I think, a really good one. The question is, what's an effective way to get a good sponsor? And I just want to share something that was given to me by someone who had like 35 years of sobriety in AA at the time and a number of years in SAA as well. And he told me that, he said, Don, he goes, listen to people, listen to their shares, find someone whose recovery you relate to, and approach them humbly and ask humbly. I go to meetings and they ask who's available to sponsor, and maybe a hand goes up, maybe none go up. That doesn't mean that those people aren't available to sponsor. It simply means that I need to do the work in seeking out recovery. As people have already said here, it's the sponsee's recovery. It's not the sponsor's recovery. The sponsor has their own recovery. So the willingness has to come from inside. The desire, as it said in the reading, has to be internal. If that desire is external, if we're doing this for a spouse or something like that, it's not going to work long term. It might work short term, but it's not going to work long term. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Don.
Can I just add one more thing?
Yeah, please.
What's interesting to me is when I'm working with the sponsee, and they say, oh yeah, I sat down just 20 minutes before you came so I could get my homework done, and my response to them is, you're not doing your homework for me. I could care less whether you do your homework. You're doing your homework for you. So don't sit down 20 minutes just because I'm the teacher showing up. That's not the point. Do it because this is meaningful to you.
Intrinsic motivation. I like it. Great. Well, thank you all for sharing your insights. Let's give them a round of applause for our panel, please. Wonderful. We will now open the floor for any questions from our participants. Any questions? Graham, microphone behind you.
Yeah, baby. So I have a specific and broader question that's related, Don, to what you just said, and then I have one that's general that probably applies as much it applies to all the A's, the AAs, the SAs, whatever. The specific element is about your reference to identifying essentially the right fit and making an ask. And it touches on a conversation that some of us are having over lunch, which is about the benefits and the challenges of having a sponsor who's in your group, and whether that's something that should give pause or it's something that should be an incentive because you have more contact in that space. And so I'm curious what all your thoughts are around that in terms of identifying the right person, because I was thinking about that portion and finding someone that has that identification where there's some sort of shared history where they can call you out and they know, here are the 3 sentences you're going to use to your spouse, whoever that is. I've done the same thing, like, stop it. So someone that has that shared experience, but if you're in the same circle, does that create a problem or not a problem?
You know, the CSATs do not attend typical SAA meetings because they feel that someone might not feel comfortable sharing if they were present, if one of their clients was there. They're actually SAA meetings specifically for CSATs. Most CSATs are sex addicts. Mine is a sex addict. So to answer your question, I think that could be maybe an issue if a sponsee doesn't feel comfortable sharing something around a sponsor. However, I would also say that if you don't feel comfortable, if a sponsee does not feel comfortable sharing something with a sponsor, it's fundamentally not probably a good fit. And maybe it's something that's better off if they both let go. The other side of that is that there are like 2,200 meetings. So if I want to go to a meeting that my sponsor's not at, okay, there's plenty of them. So, and one of the beauties of a meeting that I don't attend very often is I can go in there and share, and then, nobody cares because they don't even know who I am, right? So, there's lots of options. There's lots of ways to skin the cat. Anyway, thanks.
Yeah, I wanted to add what we were talking about at lunch with the kind of the flip, the sponsor not wanting to speak in front of a sponsee. One of the things that I've done in meetings where my sponsees are there is I share what I need to share. It lets them know I'm just as fucked up as them and makes me feel relatable. But one of the things that I love and miss about having sponsees at the same meeting is being able to share time before and after the meeting to do step work. We just used to do that in the courtyard or in someone's car, and we'd sit there and share step work at the time. A lot of my sponsees are through Zoom, so I have to set up special times and things to be able to have one-on-one experiences. But as a sponsee and a sponsor, whether or not the opposite is in the same meeting, I share the same way either way.
One of the things I can say is out of the 7, 5 of the sponsees that I have attend the same meeting that I go to. And if a sponsee is afraid to share at the meeting because he doesn't want me to know, my question to them is, what is going on between the two of us that you don't feel comfortable with sharing what's going on? So is it me, or is it something that's between us that you're frightened to share?
Thank you very much. The broader question is, so this is like rookie dumbass question. So thank you for your indulgence. Probably most people, or at least me, walks into this not saying, okay, I made a commitment last night, I'm not going to do this shit anymore. I've showed up to a meeting, here are these 12 steps. So I stand here at the doorstep of step 1. What do I do? And I walk through it. So that's not, I'm guessing that's not most of the folks. It's certainly not me. So how the fuck do I know where I'm at in the steps? And is that a sponsor thing or what? Because as I sit here and read them, I don't have any idea. And maybe that means that I'm absolutely at number one, but I've definitely done things that are in different steps.
I'll answer that. I'll start with that. It's always really important. There's 12 steps, so it's always really important to start with one. And I would even say someone who has had a sponsor before, but has like selected me to be their sponsor, I would, and I don't know that much about them, I would like to hear their first step. So I can get to know them as human beings, really, and what their behaviors are. I don't even start the steps until we've read the introduction and until we've done the circles. Those are like the most, to me, getting the circles done before you do your first step is really important because you get to put things in your outer circle that will help regulate yourself. So when you start to write your first step and you get in trouble, emotionally, spiritually, or physically, you have a way to get out of it. And so I always do read the introductions and then start working on your circles first. And then, when I take somebody through the steps, we're not going to skip one. So if they've told me, well, I've done step 5 with someone else, well, no, you're going to do your 4th step again. If you're picking me as your sponsor, we're going to do your 4th step again, and we're going to do a 5th step again, and we're going to do a 6th step again, all the way to 12. And that's just kind of how I work. I won't pick up somebody in the middle of their 6th step because I'm not serving them. And I need to know the person, and I need to know what their story is. I can't just jump into a step with them. We have to start fresh.
One of the things I can say is one of the first things I do with a sponsee is I give them a list of questions to fill out, which I say is a background check, but because I've done so much therapy myself, I should be a therapist, actually. But it's essentially an intake form. It says, who are you? What's your family background? Is there addiction in your family background? What are you struggling with? Are you having issues with the police? That sort of stuff. It's a 10-page thing that's over there. If you'd like to look at it, it's there. If you'd like to have a copy of it, I'm glad to send it to you. So that's the very first thing I start with. And like Diane, I think setting up boundaries is the absolute very first thing that we do. Now, in relationship to when do you know that you're through the steps, you move from step 1 to step 2 to step 3. They build on one another. And your sponsor is the person who says, okay, how do you feel about what you've accomplished? Do you feel like, are you ready to move on? And do I feel like you're ready to move on? And so then you'll have an understanding about, have you gathered enough information from this step to move to the next step? Now, in terms of the first step, normally what happens, at least in the Bay Area, is you do the first step and then you do a formal first step, which I'm sure that in the second one you think.
Yes.
Which entails you gathering all the information from your first step, going to a meeting and sharing that first step with the group. And it's important that you do that because you open yourself up to all the things that you've hidden before. And I know for myself, when I did my formal first step, I expected them to throw me out with pitchforks, But the reality of it was, after the meeting, they came and hugged me and said, you're in the right place, I love you. And to me, that was profound in terms of I've never been accepted that way for the worst things that I'd ever done in my life.
Yeah, I wanted to elaborate on this. This is kind of what I was getting at with me being in the program for about 1.5 years, trying to do this on my own, trying to figure out where I was in the steps. And it wasn't until I got with a sponsor and we actually started writing the first step. Unlike AA or NA, those programs, it's basically an admission that you're an addict. Move on to step 2. So they can do steps 1, 2, and 3 in a day, basically. One of the things I pulled out was the first step guide. There are a number of questions, and I usually We'll go over these with sponsee, let them fill out the answers to those questions, and then we write a history that becomes the formal first step. Formal first steps aren't required, but they are extremely beneficial. I've recorded, I think, 7, possibly 8 formal first steps for the podcast. A couple of them at meetings, a couple of them just one-off recordings. But if you are interested in hearing what a first step is like, there are some episodes of the podcast that I can point out. But basically, if you haven't done any of the steps with a sponsor is going to be the key to telling you when you're done with that step and when you're going to be moving on to the next one. So if you're doing it on your own, you're probably at step 0. And I would start with the circles and then the first step guide.
Great, thank you, everybody. I think we have time for one more question. Is there another? Okay.
First, I wanted to thank everybody for sharing your experiences as sponsors. It's really valuable. I have 4 quick statements and then a question. The first statement is, I think SAA is in a crisis. There is a total lack of sponsors at meetings I've been to. No one ever raises their hand, and so that's number 1. Number 2, you can't start recovery until you find a sponsor. Step 3 is, you can't complete recovery until you become a sponsor. And 4, I think the ISO qualifications that are published are unrealistic. Telling people you have to have 1 year of sobriety, you've worked all the 12 steps, just doesn't happen. And so my question to you, specific question, is how do you convince someone with low sobriety who hasn't worked all the steps to become a sponsor?
So I'll start with that one. First of all, listen, there's kind of an unwritten rule, and I hear it in different ways. It's like, okay, you have to finish your 5th step before you can sponsor, or your 7th step, or your 9th step, or whatever it is, I think I heard somebody else here say, to sponsor, all you have to have is more information than the person you're sponsoring. So I can urge a sponsee of mine who's working their 4th step to say, maybe you're not ready to fully sponsor somebody, but what you can do is take a newcomer through the first, setting up the circles and working to the first step. Now you might say to them, I can't be your permanent sponsor because I don't have enough time in the program, but I'll work with you for the first month to get you started. And during that month, then you can find a sponsor to work with you. So that's the first thing I do. The next thing is I can tell you when I started to sponsor myself, my sponsor leaned on me really hard. And I didn't think I was ready. And I can remember the first time I met with somebody, more stuff came out of my mouth that I realized that I knew. And I was more than prepared to sponsor. And I only grew as a sponsor from that point, So I think our fear is, I don't know enough to help somebody else. But the reality of it is, you know a great deal more than somebody who walks through it.
I agree with Jim. I think that if I could say that doing a step is kind of like a baby taking its first step, right? A baby taking its step is in probably so much fear about taking that first step because all they've done is fall, right? All they've done is fall, so that's what their memory is telling them. One of the things that I want my sponsees to know is that we're not trying to get it done in a month. We're not trying to get it done in 2 months. It took me 9 months to get to the 9th step. And I started sponsoring when I was at the 9th step. And I like to have my sponsees do the same thing. Just me personally, that once they get to the 9th step, that they start actively sponsoring people in the program. And the reason why I like my sponsees to sponsor other people in the program is because it's really important to give it away if you want to keep it. I'm not going to keep my sobriety by staying in my house and not sharing it. And that's just the truth. And I know that from experience because I've been in the beverage program and I've had 4 or 5 relapses from doing it by myself. So, that's what my experience is. Can you touch a little bit more about the question again so I can be quick-witted?
What would you do to convince someone with low sobriety and maybe they haven't worked all the steps to become a sponsor.
Yeah, so one of the reasons why I have them start at their 9th step is that step 9 for me, step 9 took me about 2 years to complete all of the amends that I needed to make. And so I want my sponsees to have a solid background on working the steps as far as they've gotten to, which to me, I think step 9 is a reasonable place to begin with. And the reason why is that, so they're going to have plenty of time. It's going to take them probably a couple of years to get their 9th step done. So in the meantime, it's time to start working with someone else. I don't think that we should rest on our laurels. So, I encourage people to sponsor in the groups that I go to.
After 2 years?
No, not after 2 years, when they get to the 9th step. That's just my personal opinion, and that's what I do with my sponsees, is once they get to the 9th step, then they start sponsoring.
Also what I can say is, it's not so important to sponsor somebody. Look, I have these 7 sponsees, but I also mentor people in the program. So I have people that call me once a week. We don't work the steps, but we work the program. And I have somebody from Michigan call me once a week, and we talk about the program, just generally talk about the program. And I think that that's an important way to begin understanding the program. I guess the thought that really comes to my mind is, listen, for me to sponsor forces me to understand the program, because my sponsee asks me questions that I don't know the answer to, and I have to go figure it out. And I learn so much from sponsoring. It is the major portion of my program right now. They don't understand. They give me much more than I give them.
Great stuff. I'm told we have one more question.
Yeah, it's for me. Daniel, I'm a sex addict. First, I want to just say how wild it is that we're having so much crosstalk. This is a unique setup. We normally don't get this option where we can actually ask each individual some questions. So I was reflecting on that. You all kind of touched on this a little bit, but I kind of wanted to just dive into it just a little bit more. I think it's oftentimes expected of sponsors that they have answers. So a new sponsee, someone new to the program, they're looking for someone to give them answers. You do A and B will be the results kind of like attitude. And we want to avoid giving advice. I find myself as a sponsor sometimes when they're asking that, I often will rephrase it. I'll say, this is what's worked for me in the past. This is what I've found. This is what other people, that have similar stories have done. My question is there anything that you've learned over the years of a way of addressing that with an individual when they're looking for that, a new sponsor, and they're looking for those answers where they just want you to tell them something so they can change, how you've kind of addressed that and identified that?
Yeah, I can tell you that, I get brain stumpers all the time, and my honest answer is, I don't know, and let me figure it out. Let me think about it for a while. Let me call my own sponsor. Let me talk to people I respect in the program. Let me find out what other people think so I can give you an honest answer. So I think it's important for us to be rigorously honest with our sponsees, and the last thing you want to do is make up an answer.
100%, Jim.
Yeah, I'll just add, I don't know as an answer. And one of the things I was going to touch on earlier was imposter syndrome. When I first started being a sponsor, my sponsees first started sponsoring, I don't know if I can do this. I don't understand. And that's where sponsorship lineage comes into play. I was able to ask my sponsor when I didn't know an answer to a question. My sponsees have been able to lean on me, and there's sometimes it's like, I don't know the specific thing, but I know someone who has this type of behavior. I'll refer you to that person. So I don't know is a fantastic answer.
Yeah, I would agree with that also, that, I don't think that we're supposed to know everything, right? I always lean on my sponsor for guidance. If someone asks me a question and I don't have the answer to it, I call my sponsor. And if my sponsor's in Virginia, and if she doesn't have the answer, she calls her sponsor. So I get like 75 years worth of recovery information from those two women, because one of them has 34 years and the other one has 21 years. And then with mine, I think that's the beauty of this program, is that we meet people and we get to know people and we get to relate with others in a very intimate way. And that opens the door for us to be able to learn how to be kind, to learn how to listen with intent, right? And to help each other find the answers. Because, I don't have all the answers, but I know where I can go to find them, and give me a couple of weeks, I'll get the answers for you.
I want to go back to the earlier question, if I may, which I think was part of your question was, someone with limited sobriety, how do they sponsor? I happen to have a friend who came into recovery about the same time I did, about 6 months before me, and he was working the steps with a sponsor. As I recall, this is close to 9 years ago now, as I recall, he was on step 4 or 5, and didn't have tremendous sobriety. And someone asked him if he was available to sponsor, and he said, I don't know, let me get back to you, right? And spoke with his sponsor. And his sponsor said, yeah, you're further in the program than they are, so yes. And as he was working the steps, and this person that asked him to sponsor was very motivated. So my friend got motivated. He wanted to stay ahead of his sponsee in working the steps, and it was a great thing. And if you look at the history of AA, that's if people had 3 meetings, they could sponsor. Because they had 3 meetings more than the person who was brand new. So it can work. I think it's something to. There again, sponsorship, in my experience, is a very individual thing. And it's more about the fit than it is the timing. So thank you for your question.
Thank you. And luckily, we have a lot of experienced professional sponsors here that we could also rely on in addition to our own sponsors and whatnot. So hopefully by this workshop, we're increasing our breadth of knowledge and expertise. And as situations come up like those, we have people we can ask. So I just want to say thank you all for the thoughtful questions, and to our panelists, thank you for sharing your experience and wisdom. We hope this panel has provided you with a deeper understanding of the vital role that sponsorship plays. Remember, whether you're a sponsor, a sponsee, or thinking about becoming one, you're all contributing to a supportive and healing community, and you're not alone. As we close, let's take a moment to reflect on what we've learned and how we can apply these insights into our own journey. Before we end, I'd like to remind you of the resources available within our own community for those seeking sponsors and those who want to become them. So there's lots of material up here. Jim talked about being on the email list. He can send you some of the stuff up here. And there's also the podcast, which was mentioned. There's the ISO website as well. Anyone here who does not have a sponsor, you don't have to leave today without a sponsor. You can get a temporary sponsor. You can ask someone here. We can set you up with the ISO who has temporary sponsors as well. So everybody can leave here with some form of sponsorship if you want to. Please feel free to reach out to any of us with any further questions or for additional support. Thank you again for being here today and for your commitment to recovery. Final comments, there is a survey posted all around the room, so if you have feedback on the food, on the venue, on the panel, on any of the stuff, positive or negative, we'd love to hear it just so we can keep improving this process. And thank you for being here today. Let's support each other as we walk this path of recovery. Thank you.
Yeah, such an awesome day. I really loved that. And it was great not only being at the event, but having a car ride with my friend Paul and just being able to hang out and talk in the car for a couple of hours. So much fun. Like I said at the beginning of this episode, there were a lot of peacocks around where we were, and I got some fantastic pictures of a few of them. And I don't think I've mentioned it here on the podcast, but I have been using YouTube Community to be able to post pictures. I know I posted some from the Santa Cruz trip that I was talking about, the Lost Boys, and I posted some pictures of Hai Long that I had taken. But yeah, I will post some pictures of the peacocks that were on site on the YouTube Community if you want to check that out. But yeah, since this recording was so long, I'm just going to close up this episode right here and say that if you have any feedback for the podcast, you can reach us at feedback@sexaddictsrecoverypod.com. And if you want to get a hold of me personally, you can reach me at jason@sexaddictsrecoverypod.com. I do have a couple of episodes planned. I'm still going to be doing the music and recovery panel discussion recording probably the last week of July. So if you're interested in that, you can email me. And we also have a new SAA and COSA speaker meeting coming up the first weekend in August. And I've posted that information up on the Bay Area SAA website if you're interested in attending that. Sunday, August 4th at 5:30 p.m. Pacific. And with that, I will close this one out. I am so grateful for everyone tuning into this one. And as always, keep coming back. The views and opinions contained in the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of the Bay Area Intergroup or the ISO of SAA.